Welcome everyone to today's Traffic Safety Research Institute Education Series session titled Pavement Markings for Minnesota State Roadways. Um, our speaker today is Ethan Peterson. I am Rob Dingus, president of TSRI and TMMA, and I will be moderating this session. Ethan, in order to maximize your time, I'd like to turn over the session to you and let you get started. I would ask everyone, please put uh, your system on mute so that your microphones are turned off. And at the end, we will open up with I think plenty of time on the back end for Q&A. So with that, we turn it over to Ethan Peterson.
I appreciate it. I'll try not to take up all the time, although the slides kept growing and growing in the deck as I put them together. I wanted to paint the full picture that I could, the fullest picture I could. I'm Ethan Peterson. I'm the pavement marking and crashworthy engineer, and hopefully I can give you some insight on how MnDOT's been putting down their pavement markings and kind of the process we've went through to get where we're at now. Yeah, I'll probably turn my camera off and have it focus on the slides as we go on, but you'll get to see my face at the end probably. Anyways, to hop in, this is the pavement markings for Minnesota State Roadways presentation. Let's hop right in here. So the importance, let's start out with just why pavement markings are important, right? I just like to highlight this at the beginning. Uh, we really need to start coming from the safe system approach that everybody seems to be embracing, ourselves included. And these are statistics. These statistics to the right are from the Minnesota Strategic Highway Safety Plan, 2018 to 2022. And as you can see here, the big thing, single vehicle road departures are over 40% of all of Minnesota fatalities and serious injuries. And these crashes were widely distributed across the entire state and local network. Obviously, with horizontal curves making up a disproportionate amount. But when we're looking at how crash rate density kind of falls, um, pavement markings are extremely cost effective. The density is real low. So to cover an entire system, pavement markings are a great way to cover this all. And roadway departures are particularly prevalent on rural county highways, as most of us probably know. And it's really not the road departure that we're worried about, right? It's what happens afterwards that can be devastating. Okay, when are pavement markings needed, right? This is kind of starting out at the simple side of things. I think we all know this. Centerline markings should be placed, according to the MUT, on all paved urban arterials and collectors that have traveled way of 20 feet or more in width and an average daily traffic of 6,000 greater. Um, Two-way streets or highways that have three or more lanes for moving motor vehicle traffic. Edgeline markings shall be placed on paved streets or highways with the following characteristics: freeways, expressways, rural arterials with 20 feet or more ADT greater. Um, really just saying that because due to safety benefits, MnDOT actually has chosen to install center lines and edge lines on all of our paved roadways. Granted, we probably have higher ADTs than a good chunk of our state, county, and cities, but this is our decision that we've made. And we are in our MnDOT provisions for pavement marking operations tech memo. We do state that we want to provide an appropriate pavement marking on all highways 365 days of the year. Um, and an appropriate pavement marking is one that meets that or exceeds the standards defined in the MNMETCD. We do make our own METCD, just a caveat there. And then obviously winter, right? During winter weather events, pavement markings should provide presence after pavement is clear of snow and ice. So just kind of giving that caveat because we do have to clear that quite a bit. I'll just gloss over this. Research show like in that in that tech memo, um, we kind of talk about how we fell on our minimum retros, and looking through that and the research there, MnDOT's adopted a minimum performance of 100 millicandela per meter squared per lux for both white and yellow, um, minimum in service. And as markings approach this threshold, they have to be replaced. Um, and one of the tools that we use that we verified to kind of figure out when we look at these markings is coming up. Um, and minimum initials have been set to get the desired longevity. And that's kind of leads into this next slide. How long do we anticipate these things to last? Um, and you look at this chart here, I'm just going to let you kind of take a peek. Obviously, surface applied markings last less time than our recess markings, which is why, we're really pushing for the recess markings. And we have verified that we're seeing multi-component liquids, or what we've been using primarily is slow dry epoxy. And in recesses, we're seeing, that 5 to 7 years pretty regularly, which is great. And here, this is kind of just a flow chart from that same tech memo. I guess you can look at this a little further when this gets sent out, or if you want to look through the recording, or if you want to screen capture this quick. It's also in the provisions for pavement marking operations tech memo. And as you can see, I guess I'll just note that we're calling out a lot of recessed and wet reflective markings. And we'll kind of get to why that is further along. Recess markings, right? You can see that this is a picture in my background. It's a beautiful picture, in my opinion. A vast majority of new surface and preventative maintenance projects are calling for recess marking on MnDOT roadways. The reason? A significant increase in longevity due to wear. You can see that expected chart, and it gives us quite a bit more lifespan there. And it reduces in time. I mean, one of the big things too is that the less you have to install it, we're reducing installer exposure to traffic as well, um, which is a huge benefit as well. And then life cycle cost, when we go through that, sometimes it looks like it's equal if we're looking at costs now, um, and we're less than yearly latex. I mean, we're very conservative when we look at these prices. And in the long run, I would say that if you're comparing a now cost versus a later cost, um, we're definitely cheaper on the life cycle costs. One of the other things you may have noticed was that we're pushing enhanced skid resistance markings. It's a concern for our vulnerable road users like motorcyclists, bicyclists, pedestrians. We want to make sure that these roadways are also safe for them. This is for messages only, pretty much, and the enhanced skid resistant option for added aggregate is recommended for any situation where deceleration, turning movements, or pedestrian and bicycle traffic is occurring. And you can see the listed places here, the big ones: crosswalk blocks, messages and roundabouts predominantly are definitely a good place to do it. Bike lanes, railroad crossings, stop lines, stop ahead messages. And then kind of just jumping into the wet reflective side of things that I also noted earlier on, and how we kind of got to that. Um, So we got to this pavement markings wet retroreflective standards research study. And the reason being is that we're recessing all our markings. And now when we see severe downpours, or rain in general, we've created troughs that fill up, and we can't really see the markings all that well. So what do we need for wet retroreflectivity, right? This is a situation we've kind of created through the recess, but we wanted to solve through this research study. So we had been calling out wet reflective markings, whether it be recoverable or wet continuous uh, elements. Um, but this was really drilling down into what the minimum needed to be. So kind of just laying out what this did. We did wet continuous condition testing, so participants counted skip markings visible in the 3M rain tunnel from a stationary position, 2 sets of markings at a time there. You'll see some pictures that kind of make this a little clearer as we go forward. And actually, a previous picture was one as well, but we'll get there again. So then they'd skip count. They'd count these skips, and that would be turned into an observation distance to make sure we would get in an appropriate observation distance through all this. And then we got subjective ratings of the marking adequacy from each uh, each participant. We also did some dry condition testing here, and as they drove through the tunnel, they approached this 10-foot long marking. Participants would indicate um, when that marking became visible, and then the participant rated that accuracy 1 through 5 there. And after the group of participants viewed the markings, the marking samples would be changed, and then they'd go through another round of this all. And yeah, so just kind of some of the participant information. Who were these people? It was predominantly um, older participants, and that was intended. I mean, this is the critical demographic that we were looking for, right? So the average age ended up being 58.5, 58 and a half. 43 participants from the area. 51% were actually 65 or older. 24 male, 19 female. Tried to get a balance. And then you can see the average Snellian visual acuity. And you can see they were more so on the weaker vision side. So the data overview, and this is a really good picture of comparing a couple markings that were out in the rain tunnel as the water was going. There were 1,209 human factored observations, 403 dry, 162 rain rate 1, which there was a higher and a lower rainfall, and that the higher was 2.5 inches per hour and the lower was 1.5 inches per hour. And those are still pretty high rain rates, and especially I guess us all knowing that the ASTM 2832 for continuous wetting is 2 inches per hour, and that's pretty significant. Um, so, like I said before, these two markings were simultaneously observed each trip. Um, 20 marking samples were evaluated, 11 white, 9 yellow, and then here's just the retroreflectivity ranges. Just another picture from the CCD image, uh, which is which was taken with a Prometric I-29 imaging colorimeter, just giving you a picture of what it looked like out there. And then just the dry marking as they approached it. This is what that marking would look like. So, kind of just skipping to the end, what we found was that 50 millicandela per meter squared per lux wet continuous wet retroreflectivity was found to be the minimum to make an emergency maneuver at 55. So this is the bare minimum we wanted installed for wet retro. And looking through some numbers out there, there weren't a lot of numbers when this was done, as far as degradation of wet elements really went. We had some, but from that we estimated that about 200 was the suggested initial install. We're still working through that. I would say that we are definitely going to be modifying where the yellow falls, just because yellow wet continuous values are pretty tough to get. So we'll I guess I'm thinking, we'll see where we end up, but it's definitely going to be less than that 200. And I guess just also stating that we have a special provision requiring these initial testing on all our wet reflective markings out there. And it can be done through our mobile retroreflectometer contractors we have in the state using ASTM 2832 or an approved equivalent. So there is one approved equivalent that they can run mobily. And this has been used widespread on MnDOT resurfacing projects since 2022. So we're getting some data. We're also tracking the degradation as we go here too. We haven't reached the end of that, so I guess that's good. 2022, we're still going. We still haven't reached that initial minimum on, especially our epoxy installs. So that's good to highlight. And some other research studies here, just kind of looking at some of your general safety indicators here. Uh, There's a study safety evaluation of wet reflective pavement markers here. They took a look at freeway sections in Minnesota, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, treated two-lane rural road locations in Minnesota, and treated multi-lane road sections in Wisconsin. And as you can see here, there were some pretty positive CMFs that came out on freeways for all injury crash types, 0.88, about a crash reduction of 12%. And on freeways for wet night crashes, you had about 14%. Um, there was another one, the safety effects of wet weather pavement markings. This was a safety assessment of wet weather pavement markings in the Atlanta district of the Texas Department of in Texas, but a district of Texas Department of Transportation. And as you can see, they had some pretty impressive findings there with wet night crashes having a CMF of 0.72 and a wet night injury crash of 0.466. That is astounding. I wouldn't expect you to get that everywhere, but that is very impressive that they got that. And this is just kind of a visual. This is a video from one of our 3M reps that is retired, but it's just a great video to see the difference between it all. As you can see, this is all wet reflective markings, and then boom, non-wet reflective markings. So it is a very drastic difference visually, and it's always good to have that real world video sometimes just to highlight how drastic the difference is. So moving on from that, wider markings is another big issue, big topic that we've been pressing, and I kind of go through what we've used to get wider markings here. Um, there are a decent amount of safety cases for the 6-inch edge lines, and I believe Paul Carlson was on here, and I think we've got a little bit of this in here, but I wanted to highlight all of these very impressive safety studies that kind of went into driving the 6-inch edge lines for us. So looking at the safety effects of wider edge lines on rural two-lane highways. Um, Kind of just highlighting what they looked at. There were 1,178 miles of 4-inch, 6-inch edge lines. Michigan, 4-inch to 6-inch edge lines. Close to all their state roadways switched to 6-inch in 2004. Illinois, 1,446 miles of 4-inch to 5-inch edge lines. And what did they find? They found pretty dang impressive crash reductions here as well. So you can kind of look through this, but I'll highlight some CMFs as we go forward too. And benefit to cost is another big thing here, as you can see in this last slide. There are very good crash reductions here. Just paging through, looking through it. But benefit to cost is another thing that we really like to look at here. And this is another big study that we looked at on the CMF website, the benefit to cost evaluation of Missouri DOT's total striping and delineation program phase 2 here. They had 2,300 miles of 6-inch all markings on their roadways. They went from the 4-inch to the 6-inch. Um, and then just looked at the benefit to cost they were getting. And without resurfacing on urban multi-lane divided highways, they were seeing a benefit to cost of 29 to 1. And without resurfacing on rural freeways, 24 to 1. Um, these are amazing benefit to costs. I mean, you rarely see these high numbers for benefit to cost, which just highlights how big of an impact you can make with these wider pavement markings. Crash reduction at 22% for all crash types and severities. Crash reduction at 21% for K&A severities. Also very impressive numbers. Um, Another one, safety impacts of using wider pavement markings on two-lane rural highways in Idaho. You can see here 175, a little smaller sample set, but still seeing an impressive B to C of 25 to 1 and K to A nighttime crash reduction of 39%. And then also something, just the evaluation of potential benefits of wider and brighter edge line markings, just something that got noticed in this study, that non-lane keeping glances were given longer times and curves with wider markings, which suggests reduced driver workload for lane keeping, and therefore affords more time to focus on other critical driving tasks. So as we make these lines wider, easier to see, um, the less a person actually has to cognitively take it in and think about it, and they can devote their cognitive functions to something else, right? Which is great because we all know that there are plenty of other obstacles out on roadways. So just kind of a highlight. I won't. You can just take a peek at that, and then also obviously there's cab support here, right? So just a quote that I like to put in here from Andy Whitell is automated system cameras are akin to highly attentive nearsighted drivers. So anything we can do to help out a nearsighted driver is a great thing for connecting autonomous vehicles. And the thing is really is that cameras largely mimic human vision. So improvements for human vision are also very are usually always improvements for machine vision as well. So just highlighting some Minnesota specific studies for marking width and line cycles that we've gotten through recently that I'd like to highlight and just show how we're kind of moving forward and doing what we can to evaluate what we're doing here. One of the big studies that came up recently and we just got finished was a pavement marking patterns and widths human factor study. We took a look at a chunk of Minnesota 336 and I-94 in the Fargo-Moorhead area, and we evaluated changes in the broken lane line markings. So there was a project coming up that was going to resurface that same season so we could do some temporary markings, get some things out, and evaluate it through a human factor study. We did a 4 inch versus 6 inch width study on these things. One of the big things we really wanted to focus on was what broken line cycle should we have for lane lines? You know, looking into this, surprisingly little scientific research went into where we ended up with the 1030. I think it just started out as, the broken line cycle when it first came in was like a 1-to-1. And then kind of, I think cost saving measures ended up coming back and we got to the 1030 and we're like, looks good. Um, so we evaluated a number of these broken line cycles. As you'll see, we do like our 50-foot line cycles, and we predominantly looked at that. And one of the reasons why we really like that in Minnesota is because it really helps when it comes to quick measurements out in the field, for whether it be for temporary traffic control or our state troopers like reconstructing a crash site or something. They've said that they really like that we have that 50-foot cycle for quick calculations there too. So we also looked at bordered and shadow contrast patterns to see what was preferred there. So going through it, our study approach laid out very quickly. We have participants drove a TTI test vehicle through test areas, and they would rate marking visibility and preference toward the marking designs at both day and night evaluations. And here you can kind of see the participant demographics, 27 male, 29 female. We managed to get that pretty even. Um, and even the day and night participants were pretty even. You can see even the age groups seem pretty well distributed there. And then at the end, participants would take a closeout survey comparing marking patterns. So just some examples of what we looked at and how they looked in the field, right? The 1030, the 1040, you can definitely tell the 1040 is further out than the 1030 there. You can kind of see the sections as they were broken down. Um, yeah, and take a little more pictures, these different broken line cycles, the 12.5, 37.5, which would get us to that 1:3 ratio that the federal MUT or MUTCD requires. I don't know if you've caught on. I probably said the MUT a few times. Here in Minnesota, we refer to the MUTCD as the MUT. I don't think that's a very widespread thing, but just kind of an interesting thing that I'll throw in there. And then you see the 2030 cycle here as well. Um, and then looking at the contrast, we've got a 10-foot line, 10-foot contrast, 10-foot black contrast, and then a 30-foot gap, and then a 10-foot line with a bordered contrast and a 40-foot gap. So the human factors study, just some of the quick findings, and then we'll just kind of review the overall findings. One of the big things here, we were talking about wider markings earlier. 6-inch wide markings were definitely preferred over 4-inch wide markings for these broken line cycles. So that's a big thing to take away from this. Um, Kind of going through this, in-vehicle visibility ratings resulted in all test sections being rated higher during the day than at night. I guess that makes sense. The 12.5, 37.5, 2030, and 1525 configurations were rated the highest during the day and at night for both visibility and preference. The 1040 section was rated as one of the least visible and lowest preferred sections. Yeah, and we wanted to verify that, obviously. And then there was actually a restripe section mid-study. So the interesting thing here is the restripe section had daytime and nighttime visibility and preference increase of about 1 after being restriped, and this increase was the larger was larger than the differences between most of the marking configurations. And that just goes to show that restriping and maintaining a strong pavement marking is one of the most important things that you can do for drivers. And here, just kind of the quick overview of findings. Closeout surveys indicate 6-inch markings are preferred over 4. Closeouts, they also indicated that participants favored the 40-foot cycle at night, but not as much during the day. And at the 50-foot cycle length, longer skips were preferred, which we anticipated. But actually, the 12.5 skip line was rated equally to the 15-foot skip line, but not as high as the 20 skip line. So there's that. I guess that makes sense. Contrast marking results were mixed. This is kind of an interesting thing. Some participants liked them, others didn't. Some mentioned potential benefit in snowy weather. Interesting. And the results didn't strongly indicate the border or the shorter or the shadow is preferred for the human factors finding. I think what we found here is just that people don't actively process pavement markings a lot. So when you ask them about contrast, they don't really realize that they've seen it until they're seeing it. So interesting takeaway, but doesn't mean it definitely doesn't mean that contrast isn't a benefit. So the recommendations from the human factors study that we got changed from the 1040 broken lane line. I don't know what happened. Must have a time slide in here for some reason. Changed from the 10-foot broken lane line pattern to the 12.5, 37.5. This maintains that 50-foot cycle that we really like, and it was preferred by drivers and improves machine vision detection as well, as you'll see in this next study that I'm going to talk about. And it also meets the METCD 1:3 ratio, which is good. Um, use 6-inch wide markings, right? So it was preferred by drivers, especially on the broken line cycle. And we're looking at implementing that increase in safety and suggested by METCD as an upgrade for AV operations. That's true. We've seen that a lot. And then kind of the recommendation is if cost is a concern, start with edge lines um, and yellow markings that are warranted, markings on higher speed roadways, edge lines on 2-lane, two-way highway roadways. So, yeah, I think we're taking this into consideration. We're absolutely at the 6-inch edge lines, and we're starting to adopt those 6-inch broken lane lines. We're actually looking internally to see if we can see some safety benefits for the center lines on undivided roadways, because we have some districts that have moved to that full-heartedly, and other districts that are still 4-inch center line seems to be adequate. Um, Particularly in no passing zones when we have 2 4-inch markings. There's a school of thought there that they think that's enough. So we'll see how that goes as we look internally at safety. So moving on to that machine vision study that I kind of teased, and that was the assessing pavement markings for automated vehicle readiness. And there's the time slide again. My bad. They utilize different systems, evaluate tracking for different marking configurations. Uh, TTI had a camera system that would you take it in and it could post process stuff. There was a Mobileye 8 setup that they actually got right before this study, and they were able to look at a bunch of quantitative data for all the test areas. There was a Ford Copilot 350 assist system just in Minneapolis, Tesla Autopilot just in Minneapolis, Toyota Safety Sense in Minneapolis as well. So the drive tests were along that Minnesota 336 I-94 section in Minneapolis and in Texas. And it collected data to determine how the cameras observed these markings. And they went through a lot of markings, day and night evaluations. And yeah, they drove these with as little human input as they could to gain as much as they could. And just some pictures of what these things look like, right? This is the Mobileye and the Ford Copilot. Um, this is the Tesla Autopilot. And this is the Toyota Safety Sense 2.0. And this is the TTI system, camera system that they had here. So the Minneapolis ADAS vehicle operation results. So observations did not find any evidence, which is kind of surprising, um, that lane line configuration, skip to gap ratio, line width, or contrast pattern affected the results. And the bigger thing was in areas with lower quality markings, there was some loss of tracking. So again, maintaining pavement markings is a huge issue, right? So, and then the other things they saw, areas with turn bays or ramps had the biggest issues. So areas without dotted edge line extensions often caused on like just lane drift into these areas. Um, and then areas with roadway curvature had more issues than tangent areas. Um, when dotted line extensions were present, the amount of undesirable movements were reduced, and proper delineation at gore areas should keep vehicles out of them. Chevrons may be advisable at long gores where incursions are more frequent. Those areas that really end up looking like lanes sometimes, right? And kind of just going through some of the Texas closed course evaluations. This is day and night comparison. Apologize of 1030 and 1040 skip line spacing. Um, and these are F1 scores. And as I learned with this, I had no idea what this meant, but it's a machine learning evaluation metric that measures a model's accuracy. It combines the precision and recall scores of a model. The accuracy metric computes how many times a model made a correct prediction across the entire data set. So the higher the value, the more precise these systems were. So you look at the 1030, 1040, 1030 is definitely preferred here, right? Uh, and then just day and night comparisons here. 1030 definitely preferred. And then also we're looking at the F1 scores here for the contrast. And as you look here, you'll see that the white followed by black contrast gets you the highest F1 ratings, which leads me to believe that that is preferred by CAVs. And this is just the long machine vision findings at the end of it. Uh, better quality markings can be detected further down the road, but most are detected adequately. Nighttime detection typically better than daytime. More stripe with less gap than our current practice. So better than the 1040 for lane lines aided detection. White followed by black contrast had slightly better performance than bordered, both better than none. Um, and really, what you're getting from that lag contrast marking is a longer detection distance. So maybe not always a better detection when it's close, but it can definitely read it further out. Vehicle operation observations do not find any evidence that lane line configuration, skip to gap ratio, line width, or contrast pattern affected the results, uh, but more so the quality of the markings impacted it. So again, like just we got to maintain these things better, right? Vehicle operation also found that areas with turn bays or ramps had the biggest issues. So areas without those dotted line extensions and areas with roadway curvature were more of an issue. And then when they actually had those lane line extensions, we saw they saw better delineation with these. And then also saying that, proper delineation at gore areas should keep vehicles out of them too. So just keeping that in mind when you have larger gore areas. So recommendations for this study, what does all this mean, right? Um, they suggested implementing a dotted line extension at all off ramps, and then at ramp area, and then at on ramp areas, but leaving an opening that is as small as feasible so that entering traffic doesn't confuse that dotted line and make them stay in the shoulder lane. Um, at turn bay openings on roadways where it's expected the drivers will utilize lane keep keep assist lane keep assist systems as well. Maintain markings in good condition at gore areas in combination with dotted lane line extensions to keep traffic out of the gore area. At areas where incursions are common and the gore area is long, application of chevrons would be needed and recommended. And implementing broken lane line contrast markings when contrast between the combination of pavement surface and white marking material is low. And we've already started moving toward the lag version of contrast, as we found was benefiting. And I think that's it. I'm just going to page through some QR codes for things I brought up, the MnDOT provisions for pavement marking operations, um, the we actually have a pavement marking decision tree tool that you can go through that I'd like to highlight here. Um, there are also pavement marking patterns and widths, human factors study website, the pavement marking wet reflective standards study website, and finally the assessing pavement markings for automatic vehicle readiness study website. And that pretty much wraps it up. I really appreciate the time here, and I look forward to any questions you might have come up with through all this.
Fantastic. Excellent, Ethan. Let's open it up. Questions. Guys, don't get me started. I start asking questions, I promise you.
Hey Rob, I'll start off with a question. It's Paul.
Yeah,
Hey Ethan, can you hear me?
yeah, I can, Paul. Good
Great
to hear you.
job. Great job.
Thank you.
Interesting stuff. Um, one of the things that I get asked a lot, and I'm not sure I know how to answer it, but I'm going to throw the same question to you, see what kind of thoughts you have. Um, there's a lot going on in the industry right now, but the two big things seem to be 6-inch wide lines and retroreflectivity, whether that's dry or wet, but higher retroreflectivity numbers. um, Given the work that you've done and your expertise, how would you rate those two things in terms of, like, hey, if I'm an agency and I haven't paid attention to pavement markings in 20 years, and all of a sudden I hire somebody who's in charge of pavement markings, and they're trying to figure out, well, I don't have the resources to do both, but if I could do one or the other, where do you think the more value from a DOT would come from in terms of resources that would be needed versus safety benefits?
Ooh, that's a very good question. Uh, and I'll try to struggle my way through it. Yeah.
I actually don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to that. I just wanted to get your perspective, to be honest with you. I can go either way. I see data that I could talk about it from a width perspective would be beneficial, but also a retro. And I don't know if there's a clear cut right or wrong answer. I just would love to hear your perspective.
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer either, but I think for DOTs that have been stuck in the, restripe with latex and type ones every year, um, maybe the easiest step into it would be just looking at your bead package and trying to increase your retros through a very small incremental step and maybe not incurring a huge cost, but seeing seeing if they can see the benefit from just increasing the retros a little. Maybe it'd be a way to dip their toes into it, without a huge expense on their side, and then seeing, hey, maybe increasing these payment markings are a good thing, and we should keep going with it. Look at durables, look at maybe recessing markings, and then also getting that higher target value of 6 inch down the road too. Um, but maybe that's a good way to like start a snowball effect, kind of get people to look at uh, better pavement markings a little more easily that way. I don't know if that's the best approach, but that's kind of what comes to mind, Paul.
Ethan, are you at Minnesota DOT beginning to think about trying to maintain some form of a minimum wet retroreflectivity, or are you simply trying to create a baseline? Because that 50 number is a number that I'm trying to understand. Was that based on an ASTM a measurement process? Where I guess two questions: where did you get the 50 on the wet night? What type of system did you use for that? And second question, are you considering trying to maintain or monitor wet night retroreflectivity?
Good questions. So we are looking at maintaining a minimum. We're not sure what that's going to look like in the future, but I think that ultimately we would love to maintain, above that 50 wet continuous value. And how we got to that 50 was taking those skip counts to uh, getting your lead time, uh, and then kind of calculating to that 1.9 second of lead time, I believe, is like a pretty pretty drastic measure. Once you see a pavement marking, you could make a pretty knee-jerk reaction there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the value itself of 50 millicandela came from, we were measuring in the ASTM 2832 when they were doing that in the lab as they were creating the tape for this project. So I, I think that answers everything.
Sure. So there's a question in the chat box. Does MnDOT use centerline rumble strips, and if so, what's your policy to avoid having the recessed marking overlap the rumble strip?
Oh, so yeah, we do a lot of centerline rumbles, and we do put pavement markings in them. I mean, a vast majority of our roadways either have what we call the corrugated rectangular rumble, which is your standard rumble that you know of, and we also have a lot of sinusoidal rumbles that we've installed through our network as well. And yeah, we don't avoid them. I guess we put them in there, and we're still getting pretty good wide continuous numbers in there as well. I mean, especially sinusoidal we use as a way to recess markings because it is fully recessed, and we can get a little more longevity out of our markings that way. Um, so we don't avoid them. We put them in there. I know that we're kind of looking at the balancing preventative maintenance in there too. So when we usually put in sinusoidal rumbles, we're kind of pushing to fog seal them immediately, and then putting the marking over it there, and then avoiding it with like a chip seal or other preventative maintenance options that we have in the future to get the most out of our sinusoidal rumble and the most out of our durable markings.
You mentioned the edgeline program and looking at wider edge lines in certain areas. How far? I just interviewed the gentleman who was in charge of Missouri's edgeline program. I think you might have cited some Missouri numbers, but they actually went down to 400 average annual daily travel, and they did their testing 400 to 1,000. So they were looking at low volume roads. Now they weren't going 6 inch wide, but they did put 4 inch wide edge lines down, and their crash reductions were really quite astonishing. I mean, now it's a proven safety countermeasure because of that. And I'm just wondering, as another state similar to Missouri that has a lot of rural roadways, how do you balance the cost of a program like that with the potential for significant crash reduction?
Yeah, that's a very It, I mean, that's a very popular question for sure. I mean, we went all 6 inch on all of our roadways for edge lines, and predominantly just because of crash densities. Like, I mean, some of those lower ADT roads, sure, they don't get as much traffic, but they can be pretty desolate and dark and really hard to see delineation on. So I think we just see that as, those roadways get just as much benefit as everything else out there. So we decided to just go all 6 inch on all the edge lines that we control. And a lot of our counties are using our HSIP money to also put in 6 inch wet reflective grooved in markings as well. So
It's a good point. I mean, you raise a really interesting point. When we talk about roads and a safety number for the road, we often think, well, we have to have a certain volume in order to justify um, putting that down. But every human that drives on a road, they drive that ride one at a time, right? I mean, so every car that's on a road, that road is either safer or less safe, depending on the features that are installed. So just because the volumes are lower may mean that the potential risk or crash risk in the macro is lower. But it sounds like in Minnesota, your approach is every individual that drives a road an expectation that the road will be maintained, that road's going to be as safe whether a lot of people use it or whether it's just me and my family that drive down that road. Does that sound fair, Ethan?
yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, especially with our lower ADT roadways, some of those end up being narrower and a little more windy sometimes, and that added delineation definitely helps them.
We hear the term equity quite a bit thrown around, and especially when we think about the cities and um, disability, ADA type requirements, et cetera. But it is really refreshing to hear someone from a DOT look at equity from the standpoint of every human that operates on a roadway, and that your responsibility is how do we maximize safety so that the expectations are the same whether you live in the rural communities or whether you live in denser population areas. So it's a refreshing way to see that being applied.
We're definitely trying to do what we can to fully embrace the safe system approach, right?
Yes,
So
exactly. Ethan, what's next? You spent a lot of time on trying to understand the configuration of your skip lines. You've spent time investing in understanding the wet night capabilities. You've already started to change standards. You had mentioned the skip line configurations. Have you settled on the 12 and a half as part of or are you looking at something, different?
no, we've settled on the 12 and a half, 37 and a half at this point, especially with both of those studies that were kind of done in tandem there between human factors and machine vision. Um, so that's what we're embracing, and then also that lag pattern is something we're embracing as well. We've already started putting some of that down. Looks good. I gotta say, it looks good on concrete. It really does. So no, I mean we're looking into some of the other hot topics, like aesthetic surface treatments. We're developing a tech memo currently, and also kicked off a study looking at how those aesthetic surface treatments are interacted with by people with visual disabilities. I think that's our predominant concern, especially with the crosswalk art or the aesthetic surface treatments and crosswalks. Um, we're taking a look at how much asphalt we lose in a given year due to snow plows. I know that doesn't sound super exciting, but it'll definitely lead us to understanding how far we should be. Maybe we should be recessing our pavement markings a little deeper, or working on maintaining our rumble strips a little better too. Um, no, I mean we're a state that we're very lucky in the sense that we have a good amount of research funds dedicated to us by the legislature. Um, so I guess I'll bring up to anybody here, if you have any good ideas to research, we're always open to it, and I would absolutely entertain it to put it out there for our research cycle. We do have we go through what's called idea scale, and pretty much anybody can put an idea in there and get it looked at and possibly get funded through research. And I'd absolutely advocate that, or just reaching out to me if you have a good research topic that you'd like to look into. Um,
Does anyone have any final questions for Ethan? If not, I'm going to turn it back over to him to finish us up today with any final thoughts he may have. Ethan?
I guess I like to say this, but pavement markings I think are the lowest cost, highest benefit thing we can put out there for safety, and I like to emphasize that as much as I can, and I think it's kind of shown in a lot of the stuff I went through today, and uh, just say that, and then also just thank everybody for showing up, and thanks Rob for having me on this. This is great. It looks like Paul has his hand up.
I do. I have one more question for you,
All
Ethan.
right, great.
Yeah, go ahead.
You threw out the opportunity, so I'm going to take you up on it. Um,
Fair.
so one of the things that I'd love to see better research on, and there have been a few attempts, but I don't know if it's been, I don't know if we have enough information that we could do anything with it. But one thing that has been consistent is machine vision tends to have lower performance during the day than at night. And a lot of people are suspicious that that's due to the low contrast between white and yellow and the material, the pavements. I mean, obviously, a new asphalt road has nice high contrast, but it doesn't last long, particularly in the south. And then if it's on concrete, if we're not adding contrast to lane lines like you suggest, you researched, the contrast difference between the white and yellow and the concrete is pretty low as well. And there's been some thought about, do we need to establish a daytime contrast level for pavement markings that could help machine vision systems have a more reliable and robust detection um, in all daytime conditions? Um, there's an area right there where there's more research needed. So if you're looking for research ideas based on the type of research I've seen you guys do in the past, however many years, really nobody's doing research as well as you guys. So I'd love to see MnDOT, do something about that, look into it, see if there's um, a real need there, and if there is a need, how do we go about measuring contrast during the day? Is it QD? Is it color contrast? Is it something different? And how do we manage that? Because we've been doing a pretty good job of talking about managing retroreflectivity, which is a nighttime performance mostly for humans. But if the fleet is changing over to machine vision systems rapidly, which I think is safe to say that it is, and we know there's a gap for daytime. How do we go? We need research in that space to better understand what's needed. How do we adjust our policies, practices, and standards to accommodate that? That would be some really neat stuff if you guys were able to, prioritize that in MnDOT and do some really good research on it.
No, that's a great idea. I'll definitely bring that up.
Yep, I can send you a paragraph or two if that would help, but I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah, anything would help, but yeah, absolutely, I can carry that forward.
Okay, super. I'll send you something in a couple days.
Appreciate it, Paul.
Wonderful. And with that, we will end our session today. Thank you all for attending. And once again, Ethan, thank you not just for this, but for everything you're doing on behalf of improving the use of road markings for the people of Minnesota. Everyone
Appreciate
have a
it.
great afternoon. Thank you.